Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the section on CPI. So hopefully you're all recovered from that section on the FOMC, and not just the FOMC, right? It was a lot more than FOMC. Now you know you're experts. People talk about the FOMC all the time, but actually they should be talking about the Federal Reserve, because the FOMC is just one part of the Federal Reserve system, right? That you know now very, very well. Federal Reserve system with the 12 reserve banks, and then the FOMC is just part of that. It's a committee that oversees monetary policy, essentially. But obviously the day-to-day running is all managed by the Federal Reserve and the presidents and so on, all the stuff we talked about. And actually, hopefully you would have taken a bit of a break, because I cut that section into 4, right? In the end, I was going to cut it into 3, but then when I was cutting it up and uploading it into the course, didn't even realize it went on for 4.5, maybe 5 hours, I think it was. And I'd done that straight. Incredible section, right? Really, really, I think, incredible section. What other word to describe it? Really, really useful. For you and for me. Nice refresher for me as well. Very important stuff there. Point is, couple of points here, right? Reason I'm mentioning all of this is, number one, hopefully you've taken a break. Okay, don't rush ahead and start this next section, inflation. I would suggest at least watching that Fed section. And I know no one's going to listen to me, but at least 3 times. Okay, it might take you a month to go through that Fed section 3 times, but those that do it, and it was the same in Pro and Foundation, a lot of people rushed ahead, and that's fine. Okay, you do it, fine. People are eager, keen, fascinated. Wow, never seen this stuff before. Or not everyone, but obviously a lot of you wouldn't have seen a lot of the stuff I was talking about. If you're doing the Pro and Foundation, that is, you may just be doing fundamentals and not doing that. But a lot of people rushed ahead and then found. As I said, do a lot of the things a few times. It's better to do it that way. Or if you prefer to go through everything, at least go back and do everything a few times. Because like I said, there's a lot to take in, right? It's 5 hours over the 4 parts for a reason. There's a lot of information there. So make sure you take your time. And then the second point I wanted to make is that the reason I made it so long, a lot of this stuff is already covered now. Everything is covered. We've done so much analysis in that. We talked about inflation already, right? So this section hopefully should be quite short. There's no point going over, why inflation is important and how it's interpreted and used. We've done it all. Okay, that's why I say make sure you do the FOMC, the Federal Reserve section several times, okay, because then you will have already a very good grounding in inflation before I start talking about it, because I'm not going to cover it again now. There's no point me talking about circular flow of income here and all of that stuff. I'm not going to talk about that. There's no point. I'll just be repeating exactly what I said in the FOMC section. So if you haven't understood everything about inflation from the FOMC section, best for the Fed section, go and do that section again, because what I'm gonna do, right, as you know, I like to do things that really add value. So I might at the end of this just do a quick summary in terms of the circular flow and just remind you, but I won't go into anywhere near as much detail as the Fed section. What I want to do in this section, I'm gonna keep it short. We talked about inflation for so long in that Fed section. What I really want to do, where I might be able to actually add some value, is just to help you understand how CPI is put together and the basket that they come up with. Now you've got to be a little bit careful here. I think a lot of it isn't that it is important you understand it, but don't get bogged down. Like I said before, there's a lot of people say fine line, but there isn't a fine line. There's a very clear line between traders and then economists and people in government and statisticians and government, okay, they will get bogged down in things like, is the basket that the BLS uses to calculate CPI the correct basket? Should I include this item, that item? And we'll talk about that in a moment. Don't get bogged down in it. And in fact, probably the best way to start this section is, let's just get into it. I'm going to explain to you my understanding of how the BLS sort of congregates all the data together and produces the CPI number. And then we can talk a little bit about the dangers of getting too deep into this, because it's end of the day, are you here to trade, or are you here to be an economist and question whether the way that inflation is calculated is correct or not? Okay, I would argue that that's not going to help you as a trader. What's going to help you as a trader is having a pretty decent understanding of what it is, and then that's it. So what we can do, as always, let's just remind ourselves exactly what we're doing here. We've covered all the survey data, payrolls, we've covered FOMC, we've covered GDP, we've just got CPI and retail sales we'll have a quick chat about. But these are now coming towards the end. I've covered CPI. I was going to say not as important as some of this stuff, but obviously CPI is very important, inflation, but retail sales to an extent it's not followed as much or given as much importance, probably because it's released quite late in the month and it's a very volatile release, and we'll talk a little bit about that when we do retail sales. Inflation is obviously important, a very important piece of data. However, like I said, we covered it in detail in the FOMC section because it's part of the dual mandate. So we talked about it. So what I'm going to focus on here, rather than the analysis side of things, which we've already done, I'm going to focus more on the technical side of CPI, how it's put together, and that might add some value to you and give you some information that most of you, not everyone, obviously some of you might be aware, but I suspect the majority haven't got a clue about how CPI is put together. And I don't mean that in a rude way. Obviously that's why you've bought the course, so you can find out. So it's a good thing. And I'm going to do my job and deliver on that. So let's get into it. So like I said, it's this CPI data here. You've got it here, the month on month and so on. And the last one was on a core basis, 0.5% and 0.8 on a headline. We talked a little bit about the differences there already. So you can go and refresh if you want from part 1 of the course. If you want to go and have a little refresh before watching this, you can. In terms of the data calendar, have a look at it here. So again, like I said, just want to kind of do a little refresh before we start, just to make sure we're all on the same page, make sure we all understand what we're looking at. If you remember, the CPI data typically comes out here, so in the second week. Obviously, if you remember the monthly calendar, right? Let me just bring that back. Okay, inflation data there on its own. Sometimes you get retail sales data, as you remember, just slightly early can be there, but typically you'll have inflation data there on its own. So you can see that here. So retail sales did actually come on the Friday, so that happens sometimes, just depending on how the calendar is organized. But typically this will be inflation week. So no difference here for me. Second week of January 2022, where I'm building this course, you can see the number there. Okay, so that's the one we're talking about. So who puts this together? How's it put together? Obviously you will be slightly familiar because we built it, right? We built the spreadsheet together. So you'll be very familiar with who does it because you pulled out the data, remember, in the first section. So just a little reminder, it's the Bureau of Labor Statistics. You can go into their website. That's what I would suggest as a step 1 of this section. Go into the BLS website. Let's have a look at where's it gone? So if you go to, actually it's in home. Do you remember where we went for the payrolls? A lot of the 2 different surveys that there were. the household survey, establishment survey, and we said the Q&A was a great section. So if you go into that, and then you'll see a lot of what you need to know. It's all pretty much in here. The best way to do this is, let me just give you a rough kind of overview of the CPI and how it's put together. So in fact, you know what, I'm sorry, I'm a little bit all over the place, and you'll see why, because it's not straightforward. Okay, it's quite technical in the way that it's put together. So probably actually let's do this. If you open up another tab, okay, so maybe a couple tabs, okay, so we can flick through them. So one was the question and answers. Just make sure it's recording. Yep. One was a Q&A, and then one is publications, economic releases, major economic indicators, CPI. Okay, I don't know if you can get through this through here. Latest release, maybe. No. Okay, so if you go through the way I showed you, so economic releases, maybe inflation and prices, consumer price index, yeah. These tables. What you want is these tables. Okay, so the table that you're interested in, that I would look at for the purposes of really trying to understand CPI or inflation, how it's made up basically is this one, table 2. See that by detailed expenditure category. Okay, so if you go into that, just make sure I'm not covering it. Okay, and can you see that essentially this is your overall for all items, so it's your headline. Okay, so in the spreadsheet, can you see I've got 0.8 there? Okay, so it's that 0.8. Okay, the reason it's got 0.5 here is because I haven't updated the spreadsheet. We're going to update that, in fact, because I said that I would, if you remember from part 1, I said I'll update the next release all in one go at the end of the month, so I can show you how to update the chart. So I haven't quite updated it for the latest release of 0.5. So the one that's on the spreadsheet that I've got here is 0.8, okay, for November. But there has been another release since then, which you probably would have seen it already, because I'm gonna go back and film the last bit of part 1, how to update the charts. Now, after doing this, but obviously you won't get it in that chronological order. But anyway, the point is that the latest release for me, doesn't matter which one I look at, 0.8 or 0.5, who cares? The latest release for me, headline CPI, is 0.5, okay, released on January 12th, 2022. Obviously that's for December, okay, so the point is, it's that one, 0.5. Can you see that? For December. Okay, 0.5, the last one was 0.8, before that it was 0.9. Okay, so can you see that? 0.5, 0.8, 0.9. Okay, so once again, 0.5, 0.8, 0.9. Now when you come to do this, obviously it's going to be a completely different number, right? You might do this in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, who knows what your month-on-month reading is. Find your latest month-on-month reading. It could be 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.5, 1, I don't know. It could be minus, who knows? I don't know what it is. Obviously, we don't want it to be minus, because obviously, generally, we don't want deflation. You want some moderate inflation, as we talked about already. But point is, it's going to be slightly different to the 0.5. It may be coincidentally 0.5. But it's going to be your latest headline released, this 0.5. The point is, everyone talks about this number. CPI 0.5, or the year on year, as you know, the one we've calculated and put in the spreadsheet together. The point is, do you actually understand how that 0.5 is made up? Probably not. If you do, great, well done. If you know, great job. If you don't, not a problem either. That is what we're going to be looking at here. Okay, so that 0.5, I know I keep mentioning it, but it's very important that everyone is on the same page here. Okay, that 0.5 headline CPI number that gets released second week of the month is this here. Okay, all items. Do you remember the headline CPI includes food and energy? Okay, so you've got it here. So here can you see the breakdowns into how much detail this goes into. Look, food. Okay, it's also got all the breakdown of foods. Okay, food. Can you see how many categories there are? Energy, breaking down. All items less food and energy was 0.6, so that is the core. Can you see that? 0.6. Do you remember core excludes food and energy? If you've forgotten, go and refresh from the first section when you built all of this stuff. When you built all of this, okay, the core excludes food and energy, less food and energy, and these are all the other items. Okay, furniture and bedding, apparel, footwear, blah 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 blah, lots of other items. I mean, literally, I think there's 200 categories here that you're talking about. Okay, so all of these will feed into making that 0.5. Okay, very few people understand that, but that 0.5 is made up of all this stuff going down, 200 categories. Okay, and the weightings, obviously they're not equal weighted, you know, like you can see the weightings here. Okay, relative importance. Okay, these are the weightings. All right, keep going down, basically you'll see it, all these little weightings. All right, and then you can see the sub weightings. So, you know, within food at home, that's the weighting for cereals, bread, I don't know, fresh biscuits, cakes, cupcakes, and you know, you can see basically. I'm going to even explain to you how they come to these weightings. Okay, so within meat, poultry, fish and eggs, I don't know, let's have a look at, just picking any, okay, let's have a look at uncooked beef and veal has less weighting than uncooked beef steaks. Okay, that is most likely to do with people tend to spend more money on uncooked beef steaks than they do on other beef and veal. Okay, you know, like I said, with most of this stuff, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just telling you, you know, how it is. And then that's why I say there's a line between being a trader and an economist. If you're an economist, you might question all of this. As a trader, I don't care. Okay, I just take it at face value. Point is, at least I understand it. Many people don't even know this level of detail. Okay, I don't know what else. Let's just keep going down. Have a look. Can you see here? It's actually quite funny. Okay, tomatoes. Okay, have a slightly higher weight than lettuce. Okay, so what they found is people spend a little bit more money on tomatoes than they do on lettuce. So they've given tomatoes a slightly higher weighting than lettuce. Potatoes in the middle. It's fascinating. Go and have a look yourself, right? You don't even really need me to spell all this out for you. You can go and have a look at it. Okay, frozen non-carbonated juice drinks and all of this stuff, right? There's just what else have we got here? Coffee. Just so many categories. Like I said, 200. All of these changes, individual changes, will be impacting. Can you see this? So for example, canned fruits, or let's have a look at canned fruit and vegetables. Prices went up 0.2%. That will have a direct impact on the headline number, 0.5. Albeit a small impact, obviously it's net when you net everything out. But you see how much detail is my point you can go into with this stuff. You can actually... I'm not covering anything, am I? Nope. You can go into incredible amounts of detail. Okay, we can keep going down. You know, how much did butter and margarine prices go up or down last month? Oh, 1.4%. Decent jump in butter and margarine would have impacted that. Okay. Do you see why? Just do this once. Be aware of it, right? It's going to put you further ahead than anyone else. You don't need to look at this every time. Okay, you're not going to decide whether to buy or sell currency or S&P based on the price of butter and margarine? Of course not. But you got a good idea. Oh, okay, I understand how this works. I understand it's not just one random number. It's made up of an incredible number of items underneath it. You know, fresh fruits, apples, bananas, canned citrus fruits, potatoes, and everything you can imagine. An incredible amount of work goes into coming up with this number. Okay. So yeah, rent, and I'll let you have a look at this in your own time. Look, end of the day, you know, you don't need me to read these off one by one. It's a bit silly, right? Point is, I've just pointed this out to you, and I'm now going to just kind of give you a rough idea of how this, how these items actually get picked. So let me see if I can find the page. I think I had it open here. In fact, we'll look for it together. What we'll do is we'll go and look for it together. I believe it is in the Q&A section. So rather than me just pull up the page, I'll actually show you how you can find it yourself. Okay, so first thing you need to know is, how are these categories come up with? How do they come up with these categories? Okay, so there is a survey done where it's an extensive survey. They'll ask consumers about their expenditures, and based on the result of that survey, they'll then decide on these categories and the weightings. Okay, so don't know if I've got the survey up. I think I do have the survey up somewhere. No, we'll come back to it. Okay, we're going to come back to it. In fact, let's have a look at it. It's called the Consumer Expenditure Survey. Okay, and I'm not actually sure on the website how to find it, so you might need to Google it. Okay, it's an odd one because I wasn't able to find it on the website. So can you see here, Consumer Expenditure Survey? Okay, you click on that, and then it's tables, CE tables, top line means tables, and then here multi-year means. Okay, so can you see that? Average, so they do a survey, okay, and I'm going to take you through all of this. I'll show you, it's all explained in the Q&A anyway. And they do a survey, and can you see average annual expenditures of all consumer units? Okay, in 2020, this is basically, can you see here, how much were people spending based on a survey on certain things? So food at home, cereals and bakery products, and 640, and you see they were spending more on meats. So more than likely, meats will have a slightly higher weighting than cereals and bakery products, because people spend more money on meats. So obviously, if you're trying to reflect the price of goods for people, you want to give that a bigger weighting. It's obvious. Fish and seafood, eggs, and you know, all of this. Go through this. Okay, housing. Normal. You see how much people spend on housing compared to other stuff. Sometimes 5-10 times more. Makes sense, right? If you're renting or mortgage or whatever it is, you're going to be spending more on that than you are on certain items. Okay, transportation, food, and so on and so forth. They then need to figure out what areas, okay, to find all these goods in. Okay, because what they do, right? So for example, for white bread, or let's pick another. I mean, it could be white bread, right? It could be rice. It could be, I don't know. Let's pick one that's something that is probably more well or widely used. In fact, they all are, aren't they? But I'm just trying to think of some random stuff here, like apples maybe. So it could be an apple, okay? Would you agree this is completely random? There could be different, I mean, there not even could be, there are different types of apples, right? You get red apples, golden delicious, green apples, gala apples. There's so many different types of apples, okay? They're not going to get a basket of every single apple. It'll be too onerous for them to do that. They have staff, obviously. You know, the BLS is a big organization. I can't remember, a couple of thousand staff, right? So you can see they put a lot of resources into this. they're not going to measure every single. So what they need to do is every month, every month you get a CPI release. Part of that will have apples. Right, this is part of the 200 categories. Apples. They need to measure the change in the price of apples from, I don't know, it could be November to December, January to February, whatever. You get the point. The same apples, right? What they're not going to do is collect every single type of apple and then check the prices of those, and then the next month those same apples. It's just what they'll do is they'll pick one apple. But before they do that, they will try and figure out the best area in the country that is best representative of apples. Okay, so let's take this as a process. So one is category, right, and that is based on the survey, isn't it? Where's that survey gone that I just pulled up for you? Don't know what I did with that survey. This survey, yeah, Consumer Expenditure Survey. Okay, so CES. We'll just put survey basically. Okay, so Consumer Expenditure Survey. Number 2 is the area. Again, I believe that's done on a survey. Okay, so they will try to pick the area that best represents. It will obviously be different areas for each of these. That best represents these categories. They will then, okay, I know it's crazy, isn't it? They then, in a good way, I mean, they do a lot of work on this, and it's obviously for good reason. They will then pick, what was it, the area and then the outlet. Okay, again, based on, I think it's point of sale or some sort of telephone survey that they do. So they'll try and pick the best, literally the best shop, okay, that sells this item. So it could be apples. They will then pick the best selling apple within that shop. Okay, so if that happens to be red apples, they will go with a red apple. Okay, and I am not joking, literally someone from the BLS will literally physically go down to this shop, find that apple and check the change in the price of that apple. So that apple then goes into this. Okay, same apple. So if the price of the apple is 50 cents and then it becomes 55 cents the next month, this whole apple category will go up 10%. Okay, here's 1%, which is more realistic, 1%. Okay, so that is how they're picking these. And they go through this process for every single one of these categories. I don't know how many there are here. I think it's 200. Lettuce, same. Tomatoes, same. Carbonated drinks, okay, they will pick a carbonated drink by going through this process. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that is my best understanding of it, on how they pick this stuff. And then I think it's every 4 years, they switch the item. So it won't be a red apple. Next time it might be a different type of apple. Okay, because obviously they want to. Because what happens is consumers do change their behavior, and this is one reason that the Fed prefers to use the I think it's the PCE price index. Okay, we can have a brief chat about that versus the CPI. I'm not that bothered. I like to look at the CPI. It really doesn't matter. They move very closely together. But the Fed, do you remember I said in the last section that the Fed has a other preferred, slightly different to the CPI that they like to look at. So I think their 2% target is actually based on the PCE. But to be honest, most traders I know prefer the CPI. It's released early in the month. And actually the CPI is very important as well. It's very reflective because the CPI will be used to adjust social security payments, pension payments, and it's used as an index to make certain payments to the population. So it's a very good representation. But there is a slight difference. So with the CPI, these baskets are not updated as often. With the PCE, The PCE is done by the BEA, I believe. They actually use these same prices from the BLS. So they take the price from the BLS, but they update the basket a little bit more. And the reason for that is substitution. So if you think about it, if the price of, let's say they're using red apples here. Okay, and I think the example that I read on the website, so for example, for cheese, I think the example that the BLS give in the Q&A that we're going to have a look at, I think it's cheddar cheese or something. So it could be cheddar cheese, it could be red apples, whatever it is, okay? Even if it's milk. In fact, they use whole milk there. I was going to say semi-skimmed or whatever, but do you see my point? They may have a different item representing one of these categories, okay? Let's say the price of red apples, so let's say it jumps 10% in a month. Are people going to continue buying red apples? No, they might switch to green apples. They might switch to a different type of apple. Do you see? And this won't get updated for quite some time. Whereas the PCE have some methods to reflect that. Okay, it's not. I mean, it's not greatly. Obviously, it's difficult to change as often as they would like, but they just update these categories weights more often to reflect changes in substitution. You know, or people might not even. They may just stop buying apples altogether if apples go up and some other substitute fruit like bananas becomes relatively cheaper. They might start buying more bananas. And do you see what I mean? Behaviors change, so these weightings need to be updated ideally every month. But obviously that survey that you saw, the consumer, is it the expenditures survey, annual expenditures, this one, wasn't it? I keep forgetting what it's called. Yeah, the consumer. I had it right the first time. Consumer expenditure survey. Don't carry that out every month, right? Talking thousands of people. Obviously, it's not realistic. Whereas the BEA do have a way of updating the weightings much more often. That's why the Fed slightly prefer it. There is another reason. They have a broader basket, but let's not get into that now. Because as a trader, I really don't care. You know, I'm not here, like I said, to argue about which one is better, and they're both roughly the same, and I'm going to show you they give very similar results. That's all I care about, right? You know, whether one has potatoes and one should include cucumbers. Do you see? It's starting to get silly. You have to. This is why I say don't make that fatal error. I've seen people make that fatal error before, but I've also seen people. I've actually seen the majority of people make the other fatal error. And I hate to say it, and I'm going to say it. When you watch these videos on YouTube, social media, the foggiest what inflation really is. So it's better to know too much than too little. Obviously, don't make the fatal error of knowing nothing. That's why you need to know this stuff at least. But then don't go too far. Have the balance. Don't know too little, which is what most people know. They don't even have a clue that there's these categories. But now that you know that, you don't need to. It's not like with the FOMC, with the Fed FOMC. I want you to watch that section 5 times, 10 times, 100 times. I want you to go to bed with those 4 part A, part C, part D, part E, 4 parts, 5 hours. I want you to have those on repeat. Okay, that is crucial to know the FOMC meeting. You know, the mandate, their opinion on employment, inflation. But you don't need to start going down into, lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, and that sort of detail. It starts to get a bit silly. That's what I'm saying. I've seen people do silliness like that. When I used to work on a trading floor, I've seen people get way too obsessed, and it's like they're losing touch with reality. But it's better to do that than it is to do what most other people do, which is don't know anything. Okay, but I want to point this out to you one time, so at least you know. And it's important because I want to add some real value in terms of what, you're buying a course on fundamentals. I don't want to just give you whatever you might read out there. So that's why I'm giving you all of this, so that you do it one time. But, have some relativity to it as to what is important and what isn't. What is important is that you understand that the Fed has a big weighting that it places on inflation as a whole. It really don't matter whether canned fruits in 1 month are contributing more than bananas. And I've seen some people go into silly detail. Okay, the broader categories are quite important. So obviously, like food, energy, owner's equivalent rent, housing costs, and bit more broader categories you can from time to time have a look at, and when I'm doing my research at the weekends, it's good to know, you know. And the point I think of this whole course is, a lot of people say to me, it doesn't mean you're going to be, and don't worry, we're moving on from this, it doesn't mean that you will be doing analysis on your own, okay? You know, that would be foolish, right? I don't mean just dismiss everything that you read out there. Don't particularly like Bloomberg and CNBC and the major outlets, but as I showed you how to do the PDF searches for economic research from institutions, that research is really good. The point is, unless you study this course, in my opinion, and this has been the feedback from most people who are in the G7 community and they talk to me, and why I even set up this course is, a lot of people say, I don't understand how to read those reports. That is what this is about. Okay, so when next time you're reading a report and it says, you know, this category has gone up, or this broader category has gone up, now you know what they mean. It's this, they're referring to this. And even those reports won't necessarily go into these levels. I'm just telling you this because I want you to know even those broader categories. You know, if someone's talking about, for example, energy, I want you to know it's made up of fuel oil, you know, these different types of oil, gasoline, and electricity and gas, and, you know, that's it. That's kind of all you need to know, just roughly. You know, don't worry. I don't expect you every month to come in here and say, oh, look, utility gas was down 1%. Oh my God, I better make a different decision on whether to buy off the VWAP or whether to take the normal trend 1SD. No, because, do you see, I'm obviously exaggerating the point. But at a slightly higher level, things like energy, energy was actually down 0.4%. That's actually sometimes quite important, okay, to know, because probably the Federal Reserve will be looking for things like that, especially in a high inflation environment that we're in right now. When you watch this, it might be different, could be the opposite. But this is why analysis is very difficult for me to teach you. What I can teach you is the tools, so you can start to make informed decisions when inflation is at whatever level it is. Right, if it's a very high level of inflation, and energy is context, right? I've taught you about context a lot in the Prime Foundation. It is all context. If energy, which it has been, right? Can you see here? Energy was up 4.8% 2 months ago, 3.5%, and now it's down 0.4%. In fact, I'm glad those two numbers were there, because I was going to make the point, and this helps me make my point. If those numbers are there at +4, +3, and now suddenly it's down 4, can you see that is positive from a Federal Reserve perspective, as in the FOMC? They're going to be watching that thinking, oh, bit of relief. Inflation has been so high, they've been blaming things like energy. Now energy is down. Do you see, it gives them a little bit of relief, because things that were previously going up a lot within the CPI basket is now starting to come off. And I would bet, because that is quite a big weighting, 7.5, that probably had quite a big bearing on. Do you see it went from 0.8 down to 0.5? Okay, some of that will have been driven by energy. Okay, so at least understand just roughly the very broader categories. Okay, things like energy, you know, things like this. Sorry, what am I talking about? Some of these other broader categories, okay? Let's have a look. Just trying to find some of them. Because, in fact, this is not the best table. The best table is this one, okay? 1. There you go. Much better table, okay? I'm only showed you the other one because no one else is going to show you how this thing is made up at a detailed level, and I think it's important you look at it at least once. But can you see this? So you've got food, energy, shelter, medical care services, transportation, and then some of the other ones. Okay, this is what you'll generally see when you read research reports from institutions, is you'll see them break it down into some of these sections. Okay, so energy, food, apparel, maybe vehicles, shelter, owner's equivalent, rent. Okay, they'll break it down into these categories. So this is quite a good table, table 1. I was just showing you table 2 because I wanted to show you how those categories themselves are broken down. You know, meat, poultry, fish and eggs is actually broken down further. Okay, so you can see all the categories here. Meat, poultry, fish and eggs. Can you see? Meats, all the different types of meats. Pork, ham, pork chops, poultry. I know it sounds funny, but it isn't, right? I mean, it's quite funny, but it's a serious subject, okay? And, you know, I really want you to feel as if, hey, envy, you know, and I think most of you felt that with the Pro Foundation. That is stuff you will not, this is brilliant. You're showing us stuff we've never seen before, and that's what I'm showing you, this stuff. Hopefully you can see this is still important, okay? And even if you don't need to look at it every month, all right? So anyway, said enough about that, but it was important that I said it, so you can understand the key distinction between the tables. How often do you need to look at stuff? This, not so much. Maybe refresh your memory once in a blue moon if you're bored, once a year. The other table you can look at once in a while, this table too. But thing that is very poorly understood is how this data is actually collected, and it's important you realize that at least once, okay? And I've obviously lost the placing, how I had these circled. Is that it? Apples, canned fruit. I think that is it, isn't it? Yeah, that's it. So, you know, I had these circled for some reason. Alright, so what I want you to do next, make sure you've understood this. You can watch it a couple times, just make sure you understood how these things are done. I want to show you where you can actually find this information. I believe it is here. And let me just show you. Like I said, never take my word for anything. Do your own research. What I want you to do is I want you to expand all these sections. Okay, so not one, not two, this. What is... so the ones that you probably want to look at, okay, in this FAQ section, and I don't know, I think there might be an FAQ section just for, don't know if I can find it right now, but I thought there was an FAQ section just for CPI. I won't be able to find it right now. Don't worry, it's all here anyway. I think there's a better section that is just on CPI. It's not this, is it? Sorry, just bear with me. It's quite good actually, you get to see that. Don't really plan that much of any of this, okay? A lot of this, it's important, like, because I do try to retain as much of this information as I can, because it's quite important. So that's the reason why you're seeing me just scrambling around, because I don't really pre-prepare any of this stuff, okay? So I have no idea where I might have seen this previously. So I believe it's actually subjects, consumer price index, okay, and then about. There you go. Okay, so what you need to look for is this, about CPI. Okay, so, and then can you see this question and answer? There you go, that's it. And then just open up these ones, 1, 2, 3, 4. I think those first few, how is CPI? Just open up all of them, whatever. I want you to read all 24 of these, okay? And it won't take you it won't take you that long. So let's have a look at this together in terms of how, what is the CPI? It's a measure of the average change in prices. We already know that, so you can close that one. How is the basket determined? The CPI, don't worry, we won't read these word for word, but just very briefly. CPI market basket is developed from detailed expenditure information. So what do they mean by the basket? How is the basket? It's this table we've just been looking at, all this detail, you know, with the fruit, apples and bananas, and that basket, that's the basket. These 200 categories, I believe it's about 80, might be 70 or 60, I can't remember, 60, 70, 80,000 items that go into these categories. So let's have a look here. How is that basket made up? And I already told you it was that consumer expenditure survey, wasn't it? So here we go. Basket, and read this in your own time. I'll just very briefly jump through this. There's is developed from detailed expenditure information provided by families and individuals on what they actually bought. Okay, so there is a bit of a lag CPI data in 20 and 21 was based on data collected in the surveys for 17 and 18. Okay, and that's part of the reason why the Fed prefers the other price index that I mentioned, the PCE, because the BEA do change the weightings in that to better reflect people's expenditures more recently. So I think that's how they do it, because obviously the BEA do collect a lot of that data as well, as we saw when they do GDP and so on. So they've got up-to-date information on people's expenditures. So I think they use more up-to-date weightings, right? And do you remember the BEA does all that? We went through this in the GDP section. So that's what they do. And that survey is the one that I mentioned to you already. So you Google it, right? You can Google it. I don't know how to find this on the website. CE, Consumer Expenditure Survey. Okay, so it's that 2013. That's the survey. That's how they figure out to do the baskets. Okay, so you'll see all of these: meat, poultry, fish, and eggs. Do you remember they're the same categories? And then this is how they get the weightings. They say, oh, okay, people spent more on beef than they did on pork. So let's give beef a slightly higher weighting, eggs, and do you see? That's how they get all the, that is, this here, this survey is how they come up with these categories and weightings. Okay, that's basically what it's saying. Then it says a particular item enters the CPI. In fact, I don't know why they're saying what they should talk about. Why they're saying the item? Because the item's the last thing. Do you remember here? This is the item, red apple or whatever. That's the item. So number one is the category, the survey. Right, that's what they're talking about here in Q&A 1. Number 2 is the basket. Sorry, which is that? So sorry, number 2 here is that, it's the category. Actually, the area would then come next as to where to find this item. They seem to have jumped ahead to the item. So actually read the next bit first, then come back to that. How is the CPI calculated? All right, so you want to read that section first. It's a product of interrelated samples. First, using data from the census, we select the urban areas from which data on prices are collected. Okay, so do you remember I said to you, they select the area based on urban survey. Well, I didn't know what survey it was, but it tells you here. So what it is, right, they need to figure out, okay, they'll be sitting there saying, all right, we need to go and figure out where to find prices for fresh fish and seafood, whole milk, other milk, ice cream. Where are we going to find out these prices? They'll go to different areas, obviously to make it broad and representative, to figure out what best areas to find for different products. They'll use this survey. Okay. Where is it gone? US Census. Okay, they'll use that to find the urban areas from which the data on these prices for each category will be collected. Okay, so that is the area. Okay, then it goes one step further. I think another sample of about 14,000, I don't know, obviously I don't remember any of this stuff, but 14,500 families serves as the basis for a telephone point of, didn't even know about this. So basically what they do is seems that they do a telephone survey. So what they must do, right, these 14,500 families, they identify the area. Okay, so it could be any area, urban area, as in not rural, main area, main city or whatever. They'll be like, all right, that's where we're going to get the prices for, I don't know, apples. Right, this one, apples, what we said before. Okay, they will then do a survey of these 14,500 people to find out, where's it gone? The places where households purchase various types of goods and services. What that will then do is, based on that survey, right, they'll try and figure out what is most representative of apples, okay, based on that survey, point of purchase survey. That will tell them the best outlet, as in store, to go to find prices for apples. Make sense? Outlet. So that survey is actually this survey, the telephone point of purchase survey. It's incredible, right? The amount of work done. But also, I keep saying it's incredible how little people understand them. You know, they talk a big talk on social media and YouTube about inflation. Do they actually understand it? No. Right, so actually it's great that you're now getting, that's why I say at least once, if you go through this, it's good. You don't need to do it every month, just get it once and then it will stick with you. So you can see what they're doing there. They're doing this telephone survey, point of purchase survey, identifies the places where households purchase various type of goods and services, forms the outlet. Okay, because obviously they want it to be the best type of outlet that will represent apples, right? It could be apples or whatever the category is. They then go one further. Okay, they then need to figure out what type of apple. Okay, or I don't know what, I think I just saw something here about something else up here, cheese, right? Yeah, cheese, but we'll come back to that. Okay, so a specific item is chosen based on the probability of selection for the item. So the item is here. Do you see here a particular item? That's why I said I don't know why they've put that in 4. So read 4 first, it'll make more sense, and then part 3 will explain the item, which is this. For example, red apple. That I believe it's based on how much it sells. So let's have a look. Particular type of cheese item. So for example, here they've said cheese. Could be cheese. I'm saying apple. They're saying cheese. So what they're saying is the type of cheese, so for our example, it'll be the type of apple, will be chosen with its likelihood being selected proportional to its popularity. Kind of makes sense. For example, cheddar cheese in 8-ounce packets makes up 70% of sales of cheese. Then it has 7 times more chance likely to be chosen. Okay. After probability is assigned, one type, brand, and container size of cheese. Okay, so same with apples. You know, they'll probably ask the store, you know, tell us all your apples that you sell, and then they'll see which apple do they sell the most of, which brand, all of that. That will become the red apple. It could be red apple by, I don't know, I think Washington Red Apples, or I don't know the companies, I can't remember, that sell red apples. But it'll be a very particular brand, one item. That item will then go into this. And that's the item that they use to basically figure out the price of apples. Okay, so now you know in incredible detail how the CPI is formed. So I don't think there's anything else to really say. You can read some of these. I don't really think a lot of them are that important, but do read them, please, and go through all of them. Some useful information there, but that is pretty much it. I think that I wanted to go over this a couple of times, because obviously if it's the first time you're seeing it, some of it will be new to you. Go over it, you know, make sure you're familiar with how this is all calculated. The main table that you will then, once you understand it all, is this one, that you'll see institutional economic research papers and stuff. They'll talk mainly through this one because it's slightly more compressed, obviously. And I can't remember where I read that there were a different 87, I think I read it somewhere, that there were 80,000 products. But so, ladies and gentlemen, that is how they get CPI. Okay, that's 0.6. It's literally all those categories that you see. They make it up. Now, I did say I do a little bit of reading, obviously, just to make sure I'm giving you the best information. And I did find this excellent article, and I'm not sure exactly where I got it from, but it does explain the differences between CPI. So what I'm not going to do in this section, we already covered CPI in incredible detail. Go back to the Fed section if it wasn't clear about why CPI is important, why the Fed looks at CPI, why inflation. I've covered it, okay? In fact, I'm just thinking right now, I don't really want to just waste your time and go over the same stuff again and again. You got that in the last section, use that last section for that. This, I just want to focus on the technicality of it. And, you know, it's a bit of an advantage of me having spent 4 or 5 hours doing the FOMC section, is I covered all the stuff I would have normally covered about CPI in this section. You know, about why CPI or inflation comes about. You know, why do prices rise? I talked about capacity. I talked about GDP, and maybe we'll do a quick summary towards the end. But what I do want to discuss, right? One of the main things, and let me just see if I can find it. So, yeah, it's this. So I've got, I found this, okay, and I've put the source here. I can't remember where exactly in Google I found it. You can Google it. I'm gonna put this, I think, in the tools and download section, so you can. I've put it into a PDF because just in case they get rid of this article one day off their website. There is another measure that the Fed like to look at, okay, and rather than me just kind of, you know, regurgitate what you could easily find out there, I'm going to give you this article, okay. It's so what is it? I can't remember. I can't remember how I found it, but you'll be able to find it, okay. So you just do CPI versus what was it? PCE, okay. Okay, and doesn't come up that way, so you can just put in Brookings. Okay, so it's that article there. CPI versus PCE, Brookings. That's what I want you to look up. Okay, and it's this article. Okay, you can look at it, but just in case, I don't know, you might be watching this in a year or two and this article might not exist. I've put it into a PDF, nice PDF for you. Alright, so it's all there. Have a read of this article and it'll explain, probably much better than I can, you know, I'm not an economist, why the PCE is more of a preferred measure. Okay, the reason I don't really care is because they're not wildly different. Alright, the PCE is preferred. What we can do, let's have a quick, so have a read of this article, okay. CPI produced by BLS. It is designed to measure price changes faced by urban consumers, right, basically not rural, so about 93% of the population, which it says there. The BLS uses a survey of American families called the Consumer Expenditure Survey. We looked at all of that. We looked at stuff in much more detail than this. That's why for what we just did, I wanted to explain it to you myself, because obviously this doesn't go into anywhere near as much detail. How does the government get price data? We went through this in incredible detail. I told you how they pick the outlets, how they pick the categories, how they pick the area based on the census and what people are buying and all that stuff. So all of that, you can just have a read. It just explains it in a paragraph, basically, or two. There you go. CPI is constructed each month using 80,000 items. Crazy, right? I think this is where I might have read it. So have a read of this article. It's good. Like I said, if it's not on Google, I'll put it in the tools and download for you. There's stuff about chain CPI, and I'm not going to get into that. Can you see here? What is the price index for personal consumption expenditures? This is, if you look at the Fed mandate, I don't know if they put it on the thing that we've been looking at, but I think they do explicitly say that their mandate is based on the core PCE, okay, price index. So let's have a look here. So these were the minutes that we went through in the last section, okay, and I think you might see it mentioned here. Staff review of economic situation. There you go. That's it. PCE inflation, okay. Total PCE price inflation was 5%. The PCE is slightly lower. Right now CPI is about 7%, if you remember. I know yours might be slightly different, but obviously on my dashboard here, see it's about 7%, and the PCE is about 5%. And the reason for that is because, like I said, they update their baskets because people change their behavior, okay, and that article does explain that as well, so you can see it here. Different prices are weighted according to how important they are to the average consumer. So prices spend more on chicken than tofu. No, it's not that. Here you go. Okay. The primary CPI can overstate inflation because it prices the same basket of goods from one month to the next. Do you see the primary CPI can overstate? You know, I said the CPI is slightly higher than the PCE. So if a good, say apples, become more expensive and people choose to buy more of its substitutes like peaches, okay, the CPI will still stick to apples. I think the CPI updates the items, I'm not sure how long, you can check, but it's definitely slower than with the PCE. So do you see what they're saying? If apples become more expensive, people are going to buy peaches, according to them. I doubt it. I'd prefer to buy some grapes. But no, jokes aside, they're saying peaches, but the CPI will continue using apples. So obviously the PCE is slightly different. It does change the weightings to take into account those sort of things. So that's why the Fed prefers that measure. So we're going to have a look anyway, like I said, at this PCE just very briefly, because I'm not going to go into the details of the PCE. I don't actually follow the PCE. I've noticed the market isn't that bothered about it because it comes out later. CPI comes out quite early in the month. The personal consumption expenditures price index, I think it is released with personal consumption expenditures, right, from the BEA. You know, as part of the GDP stuff that they do, personal consumption expenditures, we already went over this. So if you don't remember, go back to the GDP section. It's the price index of that survey release, basically. The Fed likes to look at that. So if you think about it, it makes sense because the CPI categories are done on that consumer expenditure survey. The personal consumption expenditure, same sort of thing, but it's more up to date, right? It's a monthly survey. So it reflects people's behaviors a lot more recently. But to be fair, they're using the same prices, right? The ultimate prices that the BEA use for the PCE still comes from the CPI. That's why what you will see when you compare the two of them, can you see here? CPI and PCE, can you see they're very similar in terms of the rate of change? Down, down, up, up. Okay, albeit the CPI will be slightly higher. So for me, I don't care. I'm more interested in the change in the CPI, and can you see the changes are all virtually identical because they're using the same prices. It's just that obviously the weightings will be different, like I said, because the PCE, and if you don't remember this, go and check the GDP section. The PCE is more reflective of consumption expenditures more recently, whereas that survey that the BLS does is obviously more historical. Remember, we were just looking at the Q&A and it said that the expenditures are lagged. So 2020 data used 2017, 2018 data, if you remember. So it's just a little bit more out of date. That's it. And the Fed prefers to use more up-to-date data. There is slightly other differences which you can have a look at as well. But coming back to the previous point I mentioned about the Fed using the PCE, it is here somewhere. So the staff review, can you see the staff review started with the PCE? Total PCE, then they talked about CPI afterwards. So CPI is still very important for them, but obviously PCE for the reasons mentioned. So it's not only mentioned first in the minutes, so it gives it a little bit more in hierarchy, in my opinion. They must have been discussing the PCE first, price index, then the CPI. But I don't know if it's actually there. Let me see. You remember they've got that little updated mandate thing that we looked at a few times. So it's this, where is it gone? Meeting calendars. This statement on longer run goals and monetary policy strategy. I think there was something in here. The committee judges that long-term inflations that are well anchored at 2% foster price stability. No, it's not in here, is it? Just trying to find where they've just says stable prices here. Okay, I've seen somewhere where it says 2% as measured by the core PCE. So it is explicitly stated somewhere. See if give it one more go. Having a look. As you come across it, you will see it. It's what it is. It's not a. Don't know where it is. FAQs, inflation, anything about inflation here. It's not Congress don't tell them. It's not like a mandate. They don't legally have to look at the PCE. It's just they prefer it. That's all. Congress wouldn't tell them. You know their mandate? Their mandate is stable prices. Okay, it's up to the Fed what they use to measure, and obviously when they report to Congress and do the testimony, the chairman will obviously have to explain, all of that, why he's using, how he sees price stability, and according to what measures and things like that. But the actual method that they use to look at it, whether they prefer CPI, whether they prefer PCE, or so on and so forth, is obviously at their discretion. So it's not a rule or anything, but they do explicitly say I've noticed that they do say it in some places. They talk about the PCE a lot publicly. So why does Federal Reserve aim for 2%? Nope. Oh, God. Let's just have a look somewhere here. Nah, it's not. Oh, God. I'm sure I've seen it somewhere. FAQs, maybe? Just about the Fed. Maybe in prices, economy, jobs and prices. Then what is inflation? Inflation is the increase, blah, 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 blah. There we go. Okay. The FOMC, the Federal Open Market Committee, judges that an annual increase in inflation of 2% in the price index of the PCE. Okay, this is actually explicitly stated on their website. All right, so there you go. So the place I found that, okay, it took a while, sorry about that, is the Federal Reserve website. Okay, that you'll be so familiar with now because we looked at it for ages. FAQs, and then down here, economy, jobs and prices. And then, is it this one? What is inflation and how does the Federal Reserve evaluate changes? Can you see it? The FOMC judges that an annual increase in inflation of 2% is the most consistent over the longer run with the Federal Reserve's mandate and price stability. Do you see? That's what they consider. The Congress basically, as in their mandate, hasn't told them you have to use this personal consumption expenditure. It's just told them maintain price stability. What they've obviously convinced Congress or whatever, they've basically managed to have some sort of verbal agreement with Congress. Obviously that can change, but Congress seems to be happy with that. When they report to Congress and say, look, according to the PCE, which is at 2%, obviously the Fed has given its reasons to them that this price index for personal consumption expenditures at 2%. Remember the 2% we went on and on about for 4 hours. That's what they deem to be most consistent in the long run with their mandate. Okay, that's the boss. Their boss. I told you, their boss is telling them you got to have inflation of 2%, maintain price stability. That's what they deem to be the best measure that determines or defines whether they're doing their job properly according to their mandate of price stability. It's all there, read it there, right? Obviously I've probably explained it better than I ever got a bit tongue-tied there, but you see what I mean, right? It is can you see they explicitly state that is their preferred measure, PCE. The market doesn't care, okay? I will tell you that, but figure that out for yourself. That's why I tell you, business plan, 6 months. I'm now thinking at least spend 1 year, but watch how the market reacts and you will see they're much more concerned with CPI because it comes out early in the month. And if the CPI goes up, PCE is going to go up. They're using the same prices. Like I said, the prices are from the CPI collection survey that we just talked about. You can even see it here in that article. God, where's the article gone? This is the last thing and then we're done. That article, Brookings, right? This one that I've put you the document for. Okay, what is the price index for personal consumption expenditures? So that is the Sorry about this. It'd be incredible if you knew how many pages I've got open here and all the stuff we've been going through. Where is it gone? Federal Reserve. Sorry. Okay, so let me show you what we just looked at. Okay, there, you see that? PCE, Price Index for Personal Consumption Expenditures, PCE. What is the price index for personal consumption? Okay, this will tell you the differences much better than I can. We can go through it just very briefly. You see here is a measure of inflation produced by the BEA. We spoke that already. Using data on prices from the BLS. That's why they're so closely linked together. The PCE is different because it covers all consumption items. That's another reason the Fed like it. Not just out-of-pocket expenses. Again, you can read about that here. Obviously, I don't live in the US, so I'm not familiar with Medicare and Medicaid, and I think they're sometimes provided by employer insurance. It says it there. So it doesn't come out of the pocket of consumers. So the CPI is just consumer price inflation. So it doesn't include it. But the PCE is more reflective of broader prices in everything. That's why the Fed likes to use that. Prices across the board that will reflect onto GDP, because GDP is output of everything, not just what consumers are paying for. So that's why they like it. So you can see here the weightings. The PCE gives slightly more weightings towards out-of-pocket expenses, things that insurance might pay for, like medical. So you can see here the weighting for medical care in CPI is like 10%, whereas in PCE is like 25%. All right, so the Fed uses PCE price index as its main measure of inflation. We just saw that. Long run target is 2%. Again, it's just repeating stuff we know. PCE is a chained index. I'm not going to cover it. Chained index basically is this. It says here, God, there's something about a chained index. Chained CPI, blah, 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 blah. I'm not going to go into the detail because it is written there, but basically the chained is that it uses substitution effects to take into account changes in consumer behavior, like it gave here where it said if the price of apples go up, people will buy peaches, which I don't necessarily agree with, but might buy something else. But you get it, same principle. And that's it. Okay, so that is why people prefer it, as in the Fed prefer it, but look at it, it's identical. CPI is slightly higher because it doesn't have that substitution effect, but apart from that, they're pretty much the same thing. You can have a read through all of this, all right? I'm not going to just read word for word of you, or what, feel embarrassed. You paying me to read off a page word for word. I'm not going to do that. Obviously, I will leave this for you. I thought it was a great article, nice little summary. Don't go into anywhere near the amount of detail that we've gone into, and we're almost done then with the CPI. The only thing left to do is just quick summary. Whether it's CPI, it doesn't matter. Ultimately, it's all about inflation and price level. Okay, we already talked about how inflation can come about. Wouldn't be a module without the circular flow, right? So I will just very briefly draw it. Okay, I'm not going to go into anywhere near the detail I went in the Fed section about CPI, but what I did want to say, that's a house, and these are businesses. What you need to just be careful, because one thing you will need to understand is that, okay, inflation can come about not only from increased demand, okay, like we talked about, expenditure, because people want the latest stuff, and obviously there's only certain capacity. Okay, wages. Okay, demand, C plus I plus G, is greater than capacity or supply. I talked about this before with the iPhones. If 1,000 people out of 10,000 on this island want iPhones and the capacity is 1,000, prices are going to be pretty stable. If suddenly everyone starts wanting the iPhone and 10,000 people suddenly go after this, whoever this company, they can't just suddenly go from 1,000 to 10,000 production. Their facilities have capacity. something has to give, prices will go up. Do you remember I said inflation acts as a little kind of let off steam? So it does, but if there's too much, it's just going to pop, right? Going to go crazy, prices are going to go up. The opposite can happen. So it can be demand, you're going to hear about this, it can be demand driven inflation. So, you know, more people wanting stuff, and that can be much easier for the Fed to control because they can influence that through obviously interest rates, as I'm not going to tell you why, but I mean, we did that before, why, you know, interest rates can obviously affect demand in the economy because people will be able to borrow more, borrow less, all that stuff that we already covered. The only thing I wanted to mention is just be a little bit careful because on occasion inflation can also be driven by capacity, okay, as well. Think about it. Maybe I'm thinking of a drastic example. This production facility burns down, right? And typically that's not the case because obviously United States as a whole will have thousands, hundreds of thousands of production facilities for different businesses. So even if one burns down, it makes no difference. I'm just trying to give you a drastic example that let's say this island, one burnt down, capacity shot down. Do you see, demand may not have changed. It may still be at 1,000. Okay. It may still be at 1,000. But capacity suddenly went from 1,000. You see, one facility broke down, something happened, or that suddenly went down to 500. Okay, do you see, that's going to cause prices to go up, even though demand never changed. No change. But this time it's the supply side that caused inflation. More typically, you know, we talked about disturbances and that's why the Fed has to step in. A lot of times where you've seen price shocks in the past is oil. Think about it. Oil shot up. It has nothing to do with demand. People don't want more stuff. What's happened is, for whatever reason, oil, you know, I don't know, the Middle East or whoever is being dominant, OPEC or whoever's been dominant producing energy in the past, they've got into conflict, war, whatever, and the price just shot up. What does that mean? It costs these factories more money to make stuff. Their costs go up, they're going to start putting prices up. Okay? Do you see? That's supply side inflation. All right? Basically, problems over here in capacity side. We've seen that during COVID, right? You know, you've heard about deliveries being delayed, shipping containers being stuck, and all sorts. So a lot of the inflation that we've been seeing recently, yes, it is demand driven, but a lot of it is also driven by capacity constraints. So that can be a variety of things, right? It can be oil prices going up or energy prices going up. That's gas and, you know, all the stuff that obviously factories and companies need to function. You know, and it could even be services. Telephone bills go up. This goes. Do you see? It can be also input costs. That's why the Fed likes to look at things like producer price index, right? Different inflation indices. It will look at things on the this side. Okay, so it's not always just demand driven. Okay, so it can be demand or supply that drives inflation, but it's basically a change in where they no longer satisfy each other, demand and supply. Then price has to be the flex that brings them back into equilibrium, basically. And, you know, if you're familiar with economics, you'll obviously know demand and supply. And obviously, if demand or supply changes, if one of these changes, then obviously the price level is going to change. I won't really get into that. No point. It's a little bit off topic. So there will be things that, you know, like in the ISM survey, I think there's the prices paid index. You know, what are companies paying for goods? You'll see people like traders will look at that, especially if supply side issues are prevalent at the time. Right now they are. The difficult for me doing analysis with you, and you're going to see the analysis I do with you in the course is very minimal because it's pointless, right? Stuff I'm talking about today may be completely irrelevant tomorrow. What is relevant is this, understanding that inflation is driven by capacity constraints on the supply side and rising input costs on the supply side, which they need to pass on to consumers, or demand side. Okay, so you will need to figure that out. Like I said, there is no indicator. People are living in cuckoo land if they think there's an indicator that's going to tell them what's going on in a simple indicator. It's not. You need to actually, and I mean this in a nice way, you need to do some work and figure out, where you are, what's going on in your environment right now. Is inflation high? Is it low? Why? Okay, I need to figure out why it is. Then I need to focus on those factors and see if those factors are coming down. So right now you saw the table that we looked at. Do you remember the energy prices were coming down? That big table we looked at, table 2 or table 1 or 2, either was fine, in the BLS website. And it had energy was rising the last 2 months for me, and then it suddenly come down this month. Okay, so that's causing supply pressures to come down. Okay, so that's good because it's making it slightly cheaper then for businesses to produce things, and obviously it can have an impact on demand as well, for people's filling up gas tanks and whatever. But you see, it's a very dynamic and involved process of understanding these things, but you can do it if you have this information. That's the point. You now have the toolkit. That's what I'm giving you. I'm giving you an amazing toolkit that no one's going to give you, but you need to apply it, right? You need to put the 6 months, 12 months work in, watch it every month. No one can do that for you. Same with, you saw with the Pro Foundation, right? I give you the tools. You need to go out and use them, and those that do will be rewarded, and you know that already if you've done the Pro Foundation. So great section, ladies and gentlemen. Really enjoyed doing that. Don't think there's any point me saying anymore, because we'll just be regurgitating the same stuff I've already told you. That's why I said go over the Fed section a few times, because it does cover a lot of inflation and why inflation is important. This will just give you a little bit more of the filling in the gaps, in terms of what inflation how inflation is actually calculated, the technicalities of it. Obviously just a little reminder that it can be supply side and demand side. So keep an eye out where the focus of the market is, what's driving inflation at the moment. If you have inflation, obviously inflation might be okay when you come to do the course, in which case the market won't be looking so much at inflation. They might be looking at jobs data, they might be looking at other things. Depends where the focus is. But yeah, so there's only really, I think, the retail sales left to do, and then that's it. And then we'll see where we go from there. See you in the next section.